Chapter 6. The Pistol and the Sanctuary. 1. It had been several years since I had sat on a bus with Troy. We were headed to Fort McClellan, Alabama for basic training. The new year was upon us. A new life was ahead. Oh, and Dad was all right. Still in a cast, but his bandages were all off. He even wanted to be the one who drove me to the bus station, but Mom wouldn't let him. "Jimmy, you can't be seen driving. They'll have you delivering mail before you're all better." He sat shotgun. I sat in the middle. We were trapped in that glass and aluminum-wrapped steel cage, one that was quite a bit nicer than the old yellow bus. We were headed south and east. Unlike our recent reconnection, it was here that our friendship began to be reestablished. Suddenly, we were army-bound, slowly rolling down the highway together, talking about how they were going to buzz our hair. And since hair was just another one of those things Troy had better than me, I was eager to sit in that barber's chair. It was the great equalizer. We spoke of how they'd yell at us constantly and wake us up in the middle of the night for PT, calling us scum maggots. I was mostly worried about push-ups, but Troy reminded me that when the time comes that we are in jump school at Fort Benning, that I'd be begging for mercy as my stick arms wouldn't be able to pull my chin up to the bar. "Oh, Lord, help me, Lord, help me, Lord," he mockingly joked, with his hands up in the air, simulating a failed push-up with shaky arms. It wasn't long, I think near Omaha, that we shifted from talking of the leaf-raking, beer-drinking, army joining, and ladder-falling past. We had conveniently skipped over Troy's recent and personal snafus, into reminiscing about our younger years. Mostly, we mocked people we'd seen around here and around there since we were kids. We laughed at their expense. It kept us talking for a while. Soon, though, as we rolled along the highway, a cloud of mobile despair settled on us, as Wilson caught me up on how things fell apart in his home after his high school graduation. He told me that his mom and dad were getting a divorce, that his dad had refused to go to counseling, that his dad was calling her a whore who slept with all of Oakwood and probably Salt Creek, too. I'd heard of kids who blamed themselves for divorce, but I'd never seen it unfold until that day. So even knowing the relationship that had deteriorated between his mom and dad over many years, he still said, "Look, I know I've let them down. I could have been a better kid, you know?" I was uncomfortable with where the conversation was going, and honestly, I wasn't too sympathetic for his mother. I had looked at Mrs. Wilson with a clear judgment ever since the fantasies that I'd held on to for so many years had faded. They'd given way for girls my age. Yes, I had begun to agree with Mom. My sympathy for the situation was only for Troy, as screwed up as he was. Even with his mistakes, I couldn't see how he found himself to be at the blame. "Oh, and I'm going to have a baby brother or sister soon, probably while we're still in basic," he said, with a phony enthusiasm in his voice and an unmistakable gloomy expression on his face. A gloominess that was a blanket of defeat. I could see that this long ride to Fort McClellan was truly an escape from his pathetic reality. I paused my breath in disbelief. This news surprised me. "Wow, that's, yeah, it sure is." I couldn't help but wonder if this baby would come out of the womb with long gray ear hair and a propensity to count money. By the time night had come, there were less than a dozen people scattered throughout the length of the bus. The young couple who were seated in front of me moved to the back to make out. I could hear the occasional moan or giggle, letting me know they were still happy to know each other. Of the rest, for the most part, I wasn't sure who was awake and who was asleep. Two who were awake, a man and a woman, were speaking back and forth across the aisle from one another. They were a few rows back. Earlier, they were talking loudly. "Rhonda, I'm Chuck." "Oh, you're from St. Louis." I'm going to visit my brother. No, I'm Presbyterian. I can afford to fly, I just choose to ride a bus. The conversation earlier was entertaining to me, but now their whispers were just quiet enough when filtered through the sound of the tires on the wet pavement, the hum of the diesel engine, and the windshield wipers making their swipe every 4 seconds, that I couldn't make out what they were saying any longer. This kept me in a strange form of anxiety. I tossed my head from one side of my mostly upright seat to the other, but it made no difference. I reached down between my feet to retrieve my old, crumpled duffel bag. I dug past the Walkman and its wires, a few changes of clothes, and a shaving kit, hoping I had missed one of the snacks Mom packed. My digging was in vain. Nothing, I said to myself. Then I remembered Troy grabbed a couple of the bags of M&Ms earlier when I offered from my abundance. Did he eat them all? I couldn't remember. His face was mashed against the frozen window, his mouth open, his sleep was deep. I glanced down to the floor at his feet. It was dark, but I was able to see with passing lights that his gym bag was unzipped. I looked back up at him, then again at the bag. Reaching down, I pulled open the edge closest to me for a better view inside, searching for the yellow bag of chocolate deliciousness. I pushed aside a pair of shoes and saw something. It was a shimmer, a chrome-like shine. It reflected the moving lights across its recognizable shape. What the? I grabbed the heavy firearm by the barrel with my index finger and thumb, then craned the .45 revolver up to eye level. Holy shit! Troy grunted and said, "Dude, what are you—" Troy, through his dopey state, grabbed the pistol from me by the grip. He looked around in a panicked and kind of hilarious way that can only be accomplished through the breaking of deep sleep. He pushed the gun back into its hiding place and zipped the bag aggressively, then pushed it against the bus wall and his feet, making it off-limits to me. "You can't bring a gun to basic training, Wilson," I said in a defensive hush. "Just mind your own business, Barrett," he said, while wasting no time as he shifted back into a sleeping position. "Fuck almighty, Finn. What are you looking for, digging through my stuff?" "M&Ms. I'm starving. When are we going to stop?" "How long have I been sleeping?" His eyes were closed as he asked. "About an hour, I guess, maybe longer." "It should be Nashville next." He looked over at me. He shook his head, then closed his eyes again. "Sorry. How was I supposed to know?" "Just stay out of my shit, Barrett." I leaned back, accepting the rebuke. I closed my eyes. The driver's voice moved and vibrated through my dreams, waking me from the moving slumber. The speakers cracked. "And if your final stop is our Northwest Atlanta station, thank you for riding with Greyhound." Troy was sitting there, wide awake, eating the M&Ms I couldn't find. "You know you talk in your sleep?" "What?" I yawned and began to dig the crust from my eyes. "Your sleep. You're 1 son of a bitch, you know that, Barrett?" He popped more candy into his mouth, smacking loudly. "Don't chew with your mouth open, it's disgusting. It reminds me of a starving dog eating." "I'm just glad I brought protection." He tapped his bag. It was secured on his lap. "You know I talk in my sleep." "What did the driver say about Atlanta?" "Yeah, I knew you did, but you used to talk about stupid stuff, like conversations with random people and whatnot. But damn, you were just freaking me out, Barrett. That was no nightmare. Nope, I think you might be what other people have nightmares about." "What about Atlanta?" I held out my hand, begging for some candy. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cinnamon roll. It was kind of smashed and wrapped up like a mummy in saran wrap. Then, out of his other pocket, he pulled a can of Coca-Cola. "We stopped in Chattanooga. I tried to wake you up, but you were out cold." "Thanks." I sat up, accepting his gifts. The city of Atlanta was an incredible sight to my small-town eyes, as the morning sun made giant yellow mirrors out of the tall buildings. "Driver said there's a few stops here. In Atlanta, I mean. We stay on the bus until we're on the south side, College Park near the airport. We will hop off there. That's where we get on the Army bus, at 1 o'clock Eastern. I already changed my watch." He held up his new Iron Man watch for me to see the time. Oh, yeah, I remember. My grogginess was wearing off. Due west, almost backtracking. Yep. You do know we're going to be back on Central Time again. That puts us an hour ahead. I know. He shrugged his shoulders. Just didn't want to risk missing the bus. You don't want to be AWOL before we get started, Finny. I can take the punishment, but I doubt you can, puny boy. Oh, yeah. Good thinking, I said, not really believing it was all that smart. I'd already made a mental note that we were to get on that bus at noon. The eyes of a small child peeked over the seat in front of me. He wasn't there before I slept. Must have boarded in Chattanooga, I thought. "Ha, Finn! Look, Kilroy was here. Remember Kilroy was here?" Troy pointed at the kid. His nose, full of green slime, was leaving a trail all across the top of the seat. His fingers curled over next to his face. It was a horrifying scene. I breathed through a laugh. "Kilroy. Yeah, I remember," I yawned. Troy was motioning with childish exaggeration, an expression of disgust at the booger scene that was before us, pointing at his own nose and making a gagging expression. I began to think of how my head was resting against my seat, and how recently I used the seat in front of me to pull myself up. I doubted they ever cleaned these seats. Good God. I squirmed, wishing I had the ability to levitate. The bus braked loudly and abruptly to a stop, as I turned back to Troy, making the juvenile expression of gagging. But Troy was no longer interested. He gazed out the window. Then I asked, "How soon did you say we'd get to the next bus?" No comment. He didn't seem to hear me. Troy's attention suddenly wasn't with Kilroy or me, but on the street, moving with people as we sat at a light in the thick traffic. Troy was fixed on a scene, an old black man who was sweeping the sidewalk in a lazy but steady pace. He was bald, and his head was shiny. The shadow behind him reached past the mailbox and up the side of a newspaper stand. It was a lovely composition, I thought. The shadow's profile, although long, was just as distinguished as he was. It was plain to me that this convenience store must have been his own. I imagined that maybe he was even the original proprietor, or maybe his father was. I'd noticed, just through this window, that people in the South looked different than the people of Salt Creek, or anywhere in the plains for that matter. My naive, small Dakota town mind began to wonder as I watched this gentle man minding his own business. He wore a white smock with blue trim. Even from the street, his name tag could easily be read. Bud. I was sure that people knew his name, and maybe they yelled his name when they saw him from down the street. He was maybe a father, a grandfather, married, happy. These were thoughts that appealed to me. These were thoughts I hoped for of myself. I desired a wife one day. I thought of having a wife more than I had even thought of having a girlfriend. My daydream had put me into Bud's life. I imagined my children running around the store while my wife worked with me at our little establishment. I was the one sweeping, except I was whistling, and I was filled with joy, frequently calling out, "Good morning," to those people with familiar faces as they walked by. Troy stared too. The side of his face was displaying that he had a dark fixation upon this man. Then Troy formed his hand into the shape of a gun. He pointed it at Bud. He twitched his index finger and made the sound a child would make when pretending to fire a gun. Pah! Then again he twitched his finger. Pah! The bus howled as we eased onward. Then, "Bang, bang!" Kilroy cried out. My heart jumped. "Bang, Mama!" His tiny voice was a southern one. We weaved through the streets, onto highways, off of the highways, onto the surface streets again. People got on the bus, people got off the bus. We rolled into our stop. I'm not sure what I was expecting, only it wasn't what I was expecting. The bus station was similar to an old, full-service gas station. There was an overhang in front of the building. It smelled of diesel fuel, and there were greasy smears on the walls and doorways. After getting our things, we sat on the bench in front, waiting for our bus. The driver of our last bus was just inside talking with the blue-haired old woman working behind the counter. "I'm just about done with all this horseshit, Darlene." He breathed in a drag from his cigarette. "I'm supposed to be home tomorrow. They got me in Valdosta tomorrow. I swear these new drivers call in sick 2-3 times a month." "Uh-huh. You know what I'm saying. You cover all the time," he said, trying to drag Darlene into his misery. "Oh, yeah, I know. I should just make my next drive north my last route. I should. Then what would they do? Maybe they'd make people do their job." "Uh-huh." Troy elbowed me with the elbow of common laughter. I elbowed back. "Maybe they'd hire real drivers." "But then you'd be up north. How you getting back, smart guy?" A gray bus with no writing on it pulled into the lot. Troy snatched up his bag and threw it over his shoulder. "I think that's us, Finn." 2. "Son, if you and Troy never cross paths in the military, it wouldn't be the end of the world," Dad had told me before I left, in his effort to comfort my anxiety. "It'll all work out in the end." I chose to believe him. Troy and I had both wished for Fort Benning to be our home, out of our affinity for the mysterious South, mostly influenced by movies like Wise Blood, The Big Easy, and even Tobacco Road. We both wished to one day be airborne, to wear wings pinned on us in the land we didn't know. As a 55 Romeo, ammunition stock control and accounting specialist, I thought my odds were not quite as good as Troy's to reach that desire. But as fate would have it, the day did finally come. "All right, Private, Barrett, you'll be rooming with Private Wilson. Room 319. It's on your key there. He's a 91 Bravo, a mechanic," Specialist Tyndall said. "The whole third floor is actually motor pool people. I guess when a spot opens up on the second floor, you can request a room with another ordnance soldier. All right?" The skinny E4 took a deep and bored breath. "Your squad leader, Sergeant Hansen, was looking for you earlier, but she got tired of waiting on you, so she went to the gym, I think. All right, so you can head upstairs if you want or hang out in the rec room, whatever. Either way, I'll tell Sergeant Hansen that you're here when she gets back. She'll be the one that gives you instructions on formation times, your job, and all that crap. All right, so you comprende?" "Yes, Specialist." Tyndall chuckled. It wasn't until later I learned that once in a unit like 608th Ordnance, you no longer were a trainee. Of course, there were a few exceptions to this rule. There were some who would try to bully their rank on underclassmen, but not usually. I knocked. No one answered. The hallway was long. The floor was shiny, a tan color. The building was quiet. I knocked again. I was just turning the key when the door popped open. "Finny!" Wilson threw his arms around me the best he could as I was carrying everything I owned. "Thought you'd never get here. You got your wings," he yelled as he slapped the airborne insignia on my chest. Come in, come in." "This place isn't quite as nice as Redstone was," I commented. "Oh yeah, I heard Redstone was sweet. Nah, this place is a shithole. Wait till you see the cockroaches. Big as a small dog. Beer?" He pulled a couple of Budweiser cans from the small refrigerator. Handing me one, he said, "My roomie just etzed. Got here a couple weeks ago. Soon as I got used to him, he was gone. He was a short-timer, had a short-timer's attitude, and he will not be missed." He took a loud, slurpy, and foamy first drink. "You gonna open that or what?" "I have to talk to my squad leader when she gets back from the gym." "Boy, you are still wound tight." "Relax, brother. Who you got? Higginbottom?" I searched my mind. "Hanson?" "Yeah, Hanson." "Aw, man, she's cool. Besides, we're off duty." The concept of being off gave me a feeling of newly found freedom. The walls were bare. The bottom bunk was made but had been laid on. The top bunk was without bedclothes. "What about linens?" I asked. "Your squad leader will be, you know what? Come on, let's go down to supply. Basement floor. Armory is down there too. Bring your beer, Finny, old boy. I'll show you around." 3. I'd been promoted twice, then demoted once because of a fight that was not my fault, and then promoted again. Through that 2-year period, I'd become comfortable in the humid and green South. Troy and I were rushing down the stairs of our barracks, headed out to play some pickup basketball at Audie Murphy Gym. As we approached the first floor, where the charge of quarters desk was, the soldier on duty looked at us with a confused expression. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" "What the hell do you care?" Troy asked the private. "Don't you know? We're on alert." "Alert?" I asked. "We knocked on every door. We're on alert. Lockdown. Every head has to be counted." "A drill?" Troy asked. "Don't think so. We have a formation at 1300. You need to look for your platoon sergeant." Wilson pressed his eyebrows together. "Fuck." "Yeah," said the CQ guard. "We knocked on every door." "You didn't knock on my door," I said. "Mine either," Wilson added. "Oh, wait, I was just in your room," he told me. "Yeah, we did. Maybe you didn't hear it. But we knocked on every door." "I think we did." He called down the hallway. "Heinrich, did you alert the second floor?" "No, you said you would." The fat CQ guard looked at us and shrugged his shoulders. Troy turned and started back up the stairs. "Oh, for crying! You are ate up with a dumbass." I followed. "I'll alert the second floor," I said to the CQ guard. 4. We finally received instructions from our platoon sergeant. We were to have our gear laid out for a quick inventory. Then, after the count was complete, we'd fall in for a mass formation. "This is a clusterfuck," said the new guy, Anderson, as he stood in an awkward position of parade rest, while the rest of us just buzzed with one another, wondering when we'd find out what the heck was happening. "Fall in!" our commanding officer yelled, with both syllables at the same masculine pitch. "Count off!" this time with an emphasis on the latter. 1, 2. Our count was in sync and felt strong. The act of counting off was twofold. First, it prepared us mentally that we were counted and that we were there. Second, it prepared us for the physical call to attention, a change of position, a snap to, becoming rigid and motionless. We performed our drill and ceremony with an unexpected enthusiasm that day. A surge of pride had moved through us and stayed with us. The seriousness of the exercise I'd not felt since basic training. "After we fall out, pack your gear and return it to your quarters," Captain Moody shouted as we stood, sweaty, at attention. "Get some chow. I don't care where. Mess hall, MRE, I don't care. Just get to Audie Murphy Gym by 1600. If you're married, I said if you're married, not your girlfriend, not your boyfriend. If you're married, I encourage you to have your family come too. Kids are welcome." There was a buzz of confusion in the crowd. I leaned forward and looked to my right, enough to see Wilson leaning forward too. Our look to one another was as if to say, "What the heck?" "Your platoon sergeant will tell you what your platoon sergeant knows. Your platoon sergeant will tell you how to go about getting any gear you have failed to keep up with it. Let me just say, this is not a drill. Having your gear in the next couple days is critical." He stepped to attention. "Company! Platoon!" yelled the platoon leaders. "Fall out!" 5. As the new squad leader, I could no longer just hang out with Wilson anytime I wanted. In fact, because I'd been moved to the second floor so that my young leadership could be developed among my MOS family, I'd not see him at all until some weekday evenings and some weekends. The new responsibilities given me were to ensure that our times for formation, floor duty, charge of quarters, and latrine duty were executed on time and executed well. As a specialist with this task, I mostly answered to the platoon sergeant. The main difference then, versus when I was a new private, was that I was watched more closely than before, by people above me in rank and people below me. We'd been ordered to meet at a makeshift sanctuary just down the road from our barracks, in Audie Murphy Gym. The rows were set up on the basketball court. A goal I'd played at 100 times graced the backdrop of the preacher, a mahogany lectern, and microphone. So I sat there, at the end of the row of folding chairs in which my squad was sitting. The church building was a building I'd avoided my entire time in the service up to that point. I was very familiar, however, with that gymnasium. The chaplain warned, "And unless you are born again, you will suffer eternal fire. It makes no difference how good a person you are, or how good you think you are." Even though I sat there in a state of spiritual unbelief, his words sifted through my conscience, unearthing the buried sins of my past. I looked around for Troy. When I did find him, he was looking down, as if in shame. I scanned the rest of our unit and their families. Some of them were crying. Decker, seated directly behind me, would occasionally yell out, "Amen!" Each time he did this, I thought I was going to jump out of my boots. I was even beginning to get angry at the bark, as it was evident to me that this was not an involuntary reflex. I was wondering where Lopez, our resident good Catholic, had gone. He'd excused himself from the chair beside me a little earlier. Then, suddenly, he walked past me. He was handing out small L-shaped kneeling benches. He had to explain to me what they were before I said, "No, thank you." After he had handed out the few that he had, he came back and scooched down next to me. I noticed the lectern. A cross was fastened to the front of it. I noticed it didn't have a figure of Jesus nailed to it. Is that significant? I wondered. Behind the lectern were a dozen other chairs, empty except for 2 older officers I'd not seen before. As he continued, the ringing in my ears yielded to a piece of the message. "The Spirit of God bears witness to your spirit, to my spirit. Are you willing to let go of yourself, to trust the Creator of all things?" I looked up. In the front row was our commanding officer, Captain Moody. He sat in the middle of the row, his wife to his left, his daughters to his right. His wife and daughters all shared the same hair, the color of coffee with cream, and straight. It was hard to imagine Captain Moody with civilian hair, or as a human, for that matter. He was more real than I'd seen before that day. I'd only known him to inspect and correct. The many times I saw him face to face was him scrutinizing my uniform or weapon. Then he lifted his arms, placing them across the back of the chairs to his side, resting his hands on the rounded backs. The youngest daughter, 10, maybe 11 years old, leaned up to her dad with lips puckered. He leaned toward her, offering his cheek to her to receive a kiss. Then she pulled his arm from around her, wrapped her arm behind his, and rested her head against his shoulder. "Mama, don't go!" a young boy screamed out with a thick southern accent. The screech of his call ricocheted off the gym walls. I looked down, but still I could feel everyone looking in our direction as the boy was just in front of me and to the right. The sermon continued, even with the distraction. In fact, it seemed to energize the chaplain's message a bit. His volume and pace increased. The civilian father tried to hush the child, but the child's mother, Specialist Cardwell, reached out for her son. The boy threw himself across Specialist Caldwell's bosom, face first, muffling the cries of his broken heart. Many of us who were younger and on the enlisted side were there alone, even though this particular meeting was designed for families to begin to prepare for our departure. Be sure to have your affairs in order. It shouldn't be contingent upon whether you're comfortable with it or not, whether you want to face the possibility of death or not. Having a power of attorney and a will in place, with letters and instructions, is always a good idea. I'm sorry that this sounds crude or insensitive. I truly am. But you do not want to leave your loved ones scrambling around, unsure how to pay bills, if that is one of your duties, or how to contact your landlord and those sorts of things. A woman boo-hooed from the back. The scene was unlike one I'd experienced before. Of course, how could I have ever experienced anything like this? We were being prepped, you see, for possible war. Everything was scurrying. I sat, surrounded by people I'd known for various lengths of time. We work together, we train together, we eat together. We share stories of our past lives with one another. We're called a unit. The word itself presents a picture of togetherness, a picture of oneness. Looking around, dressed in a uniform identical to half the people in this sanctuary, including Troy, it became clear to me. I was alone. 6. Over and over again, the news had been covering that we were on alert at Fort Benning. The line for the phone in the rec room was always 4 or 5 deep. The night before we left for Saudi Arabia, I called my mom. I waited for the second or third ring, but it picked up before a full ring was complete on my end. "Hello?" the feminine voice said in a short and quick manner. "Mom." "Finnegan. Oh my God, honey. Jimmy, it's Finnegan." Mom sounded like she'd been crying. "I'm sorry to call so late. I was interrupted by a click and rustle. "Finnegan, how you doing, boy?" Dad yelled through the other phone. "Jimmy, Finnegan's talking." "Sorry." "I'm doing fine, Dad. Mom, are you okay? You don't sound okay." "Your mom's been crying and watching the television nonstop for 2 days, Finnegan. She's been worried sick about you." "I'm fine. Things are kind of crazy around here. We're leaving out in the morning. 05, I think." "Where are you going? Are you going over to the Arab deserts?" "Dad." "Sorry," Dad responded. "Oh, bull," Mom yelled. "Tell us where you're going." "Cheryl, he's right. I shouldn't have asked. He can't just blurt out where they're going. You don't want them to court-martial your son, do you?" "Mom, I promise. I'll tell you when we get there. Whenever I can, I mean. Besides, I'm not so sure we know where we're going exactly. At least they're not telling us yet." "I love you, sweetie." "I love you too, Mom." Dad's Irish emotions then voiced through the phone. "Son, I know they train you to look out for one another. I'm thankful for that. And son—" "Hurry up," someone said, interrupting from behind me in line. I looked at my watch. "I have 5 minutes. It's been 2.5. Pipe down." "Everything okay, Finnegan?" Dad asked. "Yeah, Dad. You were saying?" "Just be careful." "Has Troy called his mother yet?" Mom asked. "I think he tried last night, but no one was home. I think that's what he said. I'm not sure if he has yet." Silence suddenly. I suppose the conversation could have gone on, but none of the topics that could carry it, like in any other phone call, were worthy of the time left. "I'll call the first chance I get," I said finally. We all finished with an "I love you" to one another, followed by a classic, awkward hang-up.